librarian and director of the John Carter Brown Library on the campus of Brown University. He's also an associate professor in the Department of History at Brown. Thanks so much for joining us, Neil.
You're very welcome.
All right, so we're going to talk about a couple pretty neat things at the John Carter Brown Library. So we're going to talk about the efforts to digitize the collection, but we're also going to talk about what you said in an email to me, quote unquote, the rock stars at the library, which is exciting. And then about some of the other efforts. It sounds like the library is kind of pushing forward in the digital direction. So I'm really interested to hear about that.
Absolutely. Well, for those who don't know about the John Carter Brown Library, it is a special library on the Brown University campus, which is focused on the history of the Americas during the colonial period, which essentially stretches from the late 15th century all the way up until the period of American Revolution, which in the case of the United States was 1776, and in the case of Latin American countries into the 1820s and 30s and beyond. It is a spectacular collection of books, manuscripts, maps, and all kinds of other materials that really tell the story about the interconnected nature of our hemisphere, and it's a privilege to work there and to steward such a collection.
I mean, it's pretty incredible. So yeah, I wanted to get kind of an idea of people may or may not know about the library. Talk to me a little bit about how the library came to be, how it got founded, and how the collection came to be.
So John Carter Brown was a graduate of Brown University from 1816. He was a descendant of Nicholas Brown, who gave $5,000 to found Brown University, or rather to change it from the College of Rhode Island to Brown University. And John Carter Brown, obviously a very important merchant family from Rhode Island, decided that he wanted to make the collecting Americana, what he called the great subject, the focus of his collecting passions. His great insight was that he didn't want to only do it as the history of the United States, but also as the history of the entire continent. So that's the reason why we collect from Greenland to Patagonia. And really from 1846, when he started collecting books in a spectacular purchase, all the way through to the very day, we continue to collect books from Chile, from Mexico. We have the largest and most important collection of Mexican imprints from the 16th century in any institution in the world, including Mexico. Ditto for that of Peru. We have the second largest collection of Haitian materials, second only to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. We have one of the top 5 Brasiliana collections in the world. So all of the scholars can come here together and sit side by side and look at all of these different materials.
I mean, it's really incredible just when you're saying this. I don't know if people can really comprehend what it means, but when you're saying that, it's pretty remarkable just thinking of the dates and the amount of documents that are in those collections and the historical significance of them. It's pretty remarkable.
Yes, that's right. And it's not by accident that it's here in Rhode Island, in the sense that Rhode Island was, during the colonial period, one of the most important colonial trading centers, and it was connected to Europe, but also all other parts of the Americas. And for that reason, it makes a lot of sense that it is here. One of the things that we've tried to do in the last several years is show that this is a resource not only for elite scholarship, which it is, but also for a much broader public. We do a lot of public events. We welcome people to come and visit the library and to see the collection, see our exhibitions, which we have, but also we're doing a lot of digital outreach, which I know is one of the topics that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So we will get to that because I think that's super fascinating. Let's talk a little bit more about the collection before we do get to that. You send over to me what are some of the rock star pieces that you have, which I think is such a fun way to kind of talk about some of the materials that you have. You spoke about you have certain items and records and maps and all different kind of ways to describe these materials, but some of them really do stand out in their historical significance. Can you talk about them?
Absolutely. So each of the books that we have in the collection really are unique. They are very, very special copies of very special books. One in particular that is also happens to be the most valuable book that we have in the collection is the 1640 imprint printed in Cambridge, Massachusetts, of the whole book of Psalms. It's often known as the Bay Psalm book. We don't know exactly how many were published originally, but now today there are 11 known copies. And what is spectacular about that is that one of them went on auction several years ago and garnered the most money that had ever been garnered for a book on auction, which is $14.2 million. A lot of money. What is even more extraordinary is that our copy is a better copy than the one that went on auction because it is in the original binding. And what is special about that book is that it was the first book that was published in what would become the United States in 1640 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, off the first press. And we specialize in the earliest imprints from all of the Americas. So even before the Bay Psalm book in 1640, in Mexico City, there were books and other printed materials coming off the presses from 1539. We have books from 1544. We also have a wonderful book from 1555, which is the first dictionary printed in the Americas between the Spanish language and Nahuatl, that is the language of the Aztecs or Mexica people. That also, in its original binding, you can see all of the different terminology. And these books were used by missionaries and other colonists to try and convert the native peoples of the Americas to the Catholic Christian faith.
Wow, that's fascinating. So because you're a library, you're not a museum, you're not necessarily required to preserve these documents. So where does the line come to access these books and these rock star pieces to use them for, reference, but then also to keep them intact and to preserve them and make sure that they're not being damaged anyway? How do you balance that?
Well, it's absolutely part of the library's history. This library is an institution that went from private hands, the hands of the Brown family, into the stewardship of a private university, Brown University, in 1901. And our current building was built with funds from the donor's family, with the estate of John Nicholas Brown in 1904. And it was built as a private institution for the public benefit. And so this is something that we have really tried to lean into in recent years, which is that we preserve the materials as in conformity to our charter, but we also want to make sure that the materials get out there into the world. So that's why we do exhibitions, we do publications, and increasingly in the digital age, that dilemma between using materials and preserving materials has really been alleviated because we can make amazing digital copies of the materials, put them out there onto our web platform, and anybody in the world can take a look at them. If they want to draw mustaches on them, they can. They can use them for whatever purposes, but we still have as our primary mission to take care of the materials that are under our protection.
Okay, all right, because I can see how that could be, if there was a book or material that was sold at auction for $14.2 million and you have one that's in even better condition, I can see how that could be a little anxiety producing to make sure you're still having that resource preserved but still providing access in some shape or form. I know a little bit different, but still. Let's talk a little bit about the research because you have such an impressive collection. You have a lot of people coming to do research at the library.
That's right. We have I often say that there's no official language of the John Carter Brown Library because we have materials in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, German, Italian. I'm probably leaving out Swedish, even Arabic. And we welcome researchers from all over the world. Anyone who is interested in the colonial period of the Americas is welcome to work in our collection. And we try very hard to bring the primary materials to them, even if they're digitized. So we want to create that access experience. We also have special funded fellowships that we have a call for fellowships, for applications every year, and so we receive between 50 and 60 fellows from all over the world for anywhere between 2 and 10 months working on projects related to our collection. So for instance, right now we have a long-term fellow who is an art historian at the University of California, Davis, John Lopez, who is working on a wonderful project called The Aquatic Metropolis, all about Mexico City in the 16th and early 17th century. We had another scholar who was working on Mexican paper during this early period. We had a scholar from Germany who was working on North American ecological history who was here for several months. And these are the world's leading specialists in their area, from graduate students all the way to senior scholars, and we welcome them and encourage them to take part in our extraordinary community.
I mean, this is all so fascinating and exciting, the fact that you can look at documents, records, books, materials, resources, whatever it is, and you have some of the leading researchers in the world coming to Providence and utilizing this material. Let's talk a little bit about not only this research, but the library's efforts to really pursue the digital front, because you're taking a look at the past and you're looking at that and really pushing forward to the forefront by pursuing digitalization. Not only through the materials, but in other ways as well. Talk to me a little bit about the library's efforts to push forward in that digital front.
So the number of researchers who have the possibility of coming to Providence and walking through the beautiful doors of the John Carter Brown Library are evidently very small. Maybe it's in the hundreds, maybe thousands per year, but that still pales in comparison to the literally millions, and even, I would say, over 1 billion people who inhabit the Americas and who potentially could have access to material which is really their cultural patrimony. We have the 3rd largest collection of material printed material for US history. So that's already 300 million people just in the United States who have potentially access to our materials and that we'd like to speak to. You add, the hundreds of millions in Latin America and in Canada, and as well as those in Europe who may be interested in the Americas, all of a sudden you're talking about a much larger number. And so we were very fortunate to receive an initial grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation a couple of years ago for a new digital engagement grant, which is going to help us to produce a platform that will allow individuals, whatever their level of scholarly or educational expertise, to engage with the materials and to learn something about the extraordinary historical items that we have in our collection. So that's really a phase that we're moving toward right now, so that we can push the material out, people can look at them. If on the 4th of July, for instance, people want to see a copy of the Declaration of Independence that was produced on board a ship outside of Newport, we can digitize that and push it out there with an explanation, and everybody in the world will be able to have that experience and to learn about history through the primary source documents. That is an inalienable right that we have, not only as US citizens, but as citizens of the world, and especially in an age where communication about historical realities is so loosey-goosey, we can actually turn to the documents and say, well, if you study these documents and look back at history, you can learn about what, at least, if not really took place, then at least what real historical actors were trying to convey in their carefully reasoned ideas about what the shape of the country and the hemisphere really should look like.
Excellent point on that. And you are working so much. You had that, you spoke about a grant, I believe, but you're also working on new digital fellowships as well, right? Which I think is even more. So, I mean, this really is a push for the library.
Absolutely, it is. We have a new digital fellowship program for former fellows. So we bring former fellows to the library so that they can work on traditional scholarly projects, but pushing it out into the digital realm. We also are just going to be hiring in this coming April an assistant curator for digital outreach. And we have 2 new curators who are coming in, part of whose job is going to be taking their specialized knowledge about the collection and applying that to the digital frame. Now, there are certain things about the digital that don't work, certain senses, for instance, like, as especially related to your previous guest, taste.
Yeah.
We happen to have one of the most amazing collections on chocolate and the history of chocolate in the colonial Americas of anywhere in the world. But we still need people like Aura to come in and to do tastings of that chocolate, because there's only so far you can get to with books and manuscripts.
Well, you know, you can always try.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Before we let you go, Neil, I would like to talk, because you are working on digitizing the whole collection, and you're what, 20%?
That's right.
Okay, so that's pretty good. Talk to me about maybe one of the biggest challenges you have of digitizing.
Well, we are about, I would say, before talking about the challenges, one of the advantages that the JCB has is that it is a relatively small collection. We have approximately 52,000 items, which by special collection standards is actually pretty small.
Yeah.
We've done about 10,000, we just passed 10,000 books, so we're about 20% of the way. We're still acquiring books, so that makes our challenge a little bit difficult. I would say the greatest challenge, we have 2 full-time staff who are actually digitizing the materials. One of our greatest challenges is giving the experience of being in a rare book library like the John Carter Brown Library in the digital realm. And because looking at something and getting a sense of something on a flat screen is very different than touching it, than feeling it, than seeing the experience of it. I believe that books have a talismanic quality. They speak to us, and they speak to us as objects, just as human beings speak to us as individuals. So I think in the future, one of the challenges will be how to create the texture, the context, and the engagement around these materials, even though they're appearing as 2-dimensional materials, so that people, be they in Peru or in Europe or elsewhere, can have a similar kind of experience as those walking through the library's doors.
I think eventually we'll get to putting on the headset 3D and flipping the pages that way, right?
I think you're absolutely right. In fact,
that's-
I've thought about the applications of virtual technology so that you can be anywhere in your own little study virtually and be looking through the materials that we have in the library.
They're doing it. It's happening. Neil, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for bringing the past into the future. We look forward to having more discussions on this. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much,
It's
Molly.
been fun. It's been fun.
Pleasure.
All right, we're wrapping up here on Go Local Live, the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Josh Fenton takes over the helm. Business Monday starts here in just a few moments. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you in just a few.